Untitled Trailer Braking. This morning we're going to be doing a disc brake install on a set of tandem 8K axles. Once you get your kit in the mail, the first thing that you need to do is open up each of the kits to verify that everything that you need is available and on site, ready to go. The first thing that you want to do is do a quick look over of each of the hubs. Make sure that the races are there in good shape. Make sure that you've got bearings. You've got an outer bearing, which is the smaller one, and the inner bearing, which is the outer bearing, the inner bearing, which is the larger one, for each hub rotor, and in the proper seal. Okay. The next thing that you'll see is the calipers. First thing that you should do on the calipers, make sure you got your brake pads. Make sure that the inlet fitting for the rubber hose is in good shape and that the two bleeder ports are in good shape, not busted off or anything. The next thing that you'll do is go through, you'll have a 18 7/8 inch hose that is equipped with a 90-degree turn on one end and the brake line fitting clamp on the other side. You'll have one of these for each of your wheels. So you should have one for each hub for a total of 4 for this kit. Then you'll have a 12-inch actuator hose. This is a non-swivel side and basically is set up the same way as the rubber hoses for the calipers. The next part of the brake line kit is you're going to have a 19-foot main line. It's a good idea to make sure that you keep all the rubber parts on the brake line kit to keep you from inducing debris into the line, which then can be have an issue with making sure the caliper is working freely. If you get any debris in here, that can mess up your brake system and cause you to have issues. So you're going to have one 19-foot main line. You will have two 17-inch lines. Then you will have one 30-inch line. And then also two 66-inch lines. That should be all for your brake line kit. The next thing that you're going to have is a 4.5-inch line. This is mainly a jumper between the two T's, and you'll see that later during installation. The next thing that you'll want to look for is the hub caps for the hubs. On the 8K kit, you have 4 of the clear oil caps that are threaded onto it. You want to make sure that the seal is all there and in place in good shape, and then the access cap is also there. The next thing for the brake line kit, you're going to have 5 for a tandem axle brackets. These are designed to mount your brake line hose to the caliper and also to the trailer, also for the actuator. So you'll have 5. Also have 5 of these retainer clips. The next thing that you're going to have is 3 brass tees, 3 16-inch brass tees. Make sure that you take a look at these tees, look inside, make sure there's no burrs inside, because once again that burr can become an obstacle inside the brake line, some debris, and cause issues with the system. The next thing that you're going to have with the 8K kit, you're going to have 16 grade 8 1/2-inch bolts, lock washers, and nuts. The brake line kit comes with Dexter Supply brake line clips for screws, and in your brake line, we recommend that you do not use these. What we include with the kit in its place is a 3/16-inch nylon clip and also a 3/16-inch stainless steel with a rubber support clip in its place. So once again, do not use these as per our recommendations. The next thing right after the caliper that you want to look at is you want to make sure that you got 2 caliper guide bolts for each caliper. The caliper guide bolts slide in a caliper guide, which is a stainless steel guide that will go in like this. Make sure that they're Loctite on each one of those, and then you'll put those in when you put the calipers in. The next thing that you'll also have in the kit is one for each hub rotor. You'll have a bracket. Once again, this is a bracket for the 8K kit. It has 4 holes for a 8K 4-hole axle flange. The 7K has 5. Other various kits will have different ones. You just want to make sure that you've got the right bracket for the axle that you're using.
The next part we're going to show you is packing the bearings. Several options on this. We got the old school way of hand packing the bearings, or you can use a device. We'll show you the handy packer, which is the one we like to use. First, the handy packer, you're going to take your bearings. It's really simple. Once you have the grease loaded inside, you put your piece on top and you're going to push it through until you see the grease come over the top. You take a little bit of extra grease and then you're going to push, just apply a little grease liberally around the rest of the bearing. At that time, you would then be able to place your bearing inside of your rotor. The other option, the hand option, take a little grease, put it in the palm of your hand, and it's the same. You're going to work that grease in through the bearing until you see it come out the other side of the bearings. Just like that. And you'll do that the entire circumference of the bearing. Again, you would then go around the bearing with extra grease before you put in your rotor. Once you have all of your inner bearings packed, the next step is to place them inside of your rotors. The first step you want to do, just place a little bit of grease inside of your rotor. Take your inner bearing. Notice how it's conically shaped. It's going to ride just right inside that race inside of your rotor. You're going to drop it in. Make sure it's seated, and then you're going to take your seal and place that over the top. There's several ways to install these seals. You can use PVC pieces, you can use a board, you can use a socket. There's several methods. I like to use just a block of 4x4. You're going to place it on top evenly, and then give it a few whacks. And then you're going to see it nice and smooth, level surface, then you know it's installed correctly. Moving outside to the RV, we've removed the tire and wheel assembly, and our next step is to remove the old electronic brakes. First step to do that is taking off the dust cover. Typically a few hits with a rubber mallet will take that dust cover cap right off. It'll pop off. You're going to take, depending on your trailer, you may either have a clip system or a cotter pin system that holds on your rotor assembly. You're going to take a pair of pliers. In this case, it has a clip system. You're going to remove that clip completely. Take off any of the extra grease.
Make sure you keep that clip.
You're going to loosen up the spindle nut. Clean that nut up a little bit, get all the old grease off and set it aside. You'll use it again. And then the next piece we need on here is the washer, which is connected to the outer bearing of the old system. Removing the old electric disc brake assembly. The next step is to grab this washer. It's going to be connected to the outer bearing with grease. Typically it'll be stuck on there. The easiest way to do that is just slightly pull it off until that bearing pops out, and then again clean off that washer and set it aside as you use it with the new system. Removing this hub assembly completely. A lot of times they will be seized on, so you may need a little finesse from a mallet to kind of get it off further. Set that piece aside, and you will not need that anymore. Removing any of the old residue from the old grease from the spindle. It's a good time to take a look at that spindle and make sure that the races on the spindle are nice and smooth without gouges. If you have gouges or the spindle is not smooth, you may need to consider getting new spindles or races. Once you have that outer hub assembly off, you're going to see the inside portions of your electronic brakes that have the magnet. You're going to take that off using your tools. Depending on your trailer setup, you may either have washers on the back or not. Depending on your setup, you're going to add those bolts. You're going to remove those bolts, and that'll allow this backer plate mechanism to come off. You're going to see the old brake line system here. You're just going to want to cut that wire cutters, and then it'll also be cut closer up to the bottom of your chloroplast, and then just pushed right through. Now, obviously, looking at this system, this is independent suspension, so yours might be a little different. Your backer plate, like I mentioned before, may include studs that are preset into the axle. At that time, for you, all you would do is take a hammer and slightly tap those bolts out. This one has a bolt and nut system, so that's not necessary at this time. Once you have the old hub assembly off and the old electric brake wires cut, the next step is to install the caliper brackets. Dexter recommends that the caliper brackets and calipers themselves are as parallel to the ground or the surface at which the RV is going to be traveling on. In this situation, you can see that it's going to be a little bit less than perpendicular to the ground. That's just the way that the axle is riding. You're going to take your bolts. In this case, we're going to, because of the independent suspension, we're going to flip the bolts around. Typically, they'd come from behind. You'd put the nuts out, and then you do your torquing that way. But on this case, we have to go from the front. You're going to put your bolts in. Now, when you use your bolts, you're going to make sure that you're using an oil-resistant Loctite and liberally place that Loctite on those bolts. In this case, we have 4 bolts to install. They're going to go around. Easiest way to do is put the bolts into the bracket, allowing the bolts to hold the bracket in place. Once on, the next step is to utilize the washers. Then you're going to take your supplied grade 8 nuts, put them on finger tight. Once you have them on finger tight, you're going to tighten them down. Dexter recommends at this situation no less than 45 foot-pounds of torque on each bolt. Once your nuts are torqued to the bolts to the specified torque range, you'll move on to the next step. Once you have your bracket and all the nuts and bolts torqued to the standards that come with your checklist, the next step is the installation of your new rotor, the outer bearing, and then ultimately attachment to your axle. The first step is to place a small amount of grease on your spindle, lubricating that spindle and ensuring you're getting the races. Once you have that pre-lubed, take your rotor, ensuring that it's as level as possible, push it on, and it should go on smoothly. If it doesn't go on smoothly, you might just have to adjust it a little bit, rock it back and forth. Taking your outer bearing that was pre-packed before, you're going to place it in that same manner, the conical shape, make sure that it lines up with that race. In this case, you make sure that the cone portion is facing in towards the trailer. placing that in there. Taking your washer, and in this case we have the clip type axle connection. Taking that flat side, making sure that flat side goes straight back down. Pushing that back. Taking your axle nut, your spindle nut. Taking this axle nut, tightening it until it's snug, ensuring that the rotor has no play in it. Then you're going to take the axle nut, you're going to back it off about a quarter of a turn, make sure it has some play, and then hand tighten it as tight as you can go. And again, make sure that there's no play in this rotor. As you can see, it's nice and tight. That means everything's seated in there. Give it a spin. It should go around about 1 or 2 times, and then it's good to go. Next step to do is to fill the reservoir inside the spindle cavity here. Take your grease gun. In this case, I got a powered one, but handheld would work as well. Taking care to make sure I don't put too much grease that's going to blow the back of the seal up. I'm going to take the gun and I'm just going to do a 12 count inside my head, 12 seconds or so, pushing the grease and filling the cavity. Once you have your grease circ there finished, these steps can be interchangeable. The last thing you want to do is take your clip, or in the case of if you have a cotter pin, at this time you're going to want to place your cotter pin on the castle nut. But like I said, in this case we have a clip. So we're going to take the clip, line it up the flat side with the flat side of the spindle on the axle. Going to push it on. Sometimes it's a little tight, so you push it. Making sure that that clip is nice and flat, securely seated on there. Taking your dust cover. In certain situations within our kits, you may have a dust cover that gets hit on with a rubber mallet. In this case, it screws on. You're going to screw that on using your channel locks with care. This is plastic. You're going to want to place your channel locks on the dust cap and then turn the rotor to get it nice and snug. Now don't over tighten because you can't break this plastic. Once that's done, that portion is done. We'll move on to the installation of the rotor. Next step, we're going to install our caliper. The first step you want to do is take a look at your caliper bolts. Make sure that they have thread lock. Some of them will come pre-thread locked. Other ones you're going to want to use your oil resistant thread lock and ensure that you put a lot of thread locker on there. That'll prevent the caliper from falling off. One trick here is to place the bolts within the caliper, as sometimes the rear gets blocked, so you can't put those bolts on. You may be taking your caliper off. Once those are on there, place your caliper on the outside, making sure that those brake pads are in place. Hand tighten those caliper bolts, and then using your 1/2-inch wrench, you're going to seat these bolts down to 35 foot-pounds of torque. Once you have your caliper installed, make sure that your rotor spins freely. Next step is to take your rubber hose. In this case, we've covered it with a wire loom for extra protection, as sometimes these rubber hoses will rub on tires or axle suspension components. You're going to take the end here using a 3/8-inch wrench, and you're going to tighten to the back of the caliper to the port. You're going to hand tighten the back here, and then like I said, utilizing that 3/8-inch wrench, you're going to tighten the nut onto the back of the caliper, ensuring that you don't over tighten. In this case, it may be better to under tighten at first, and then once we're towards the end and we're bleeding, then tighten, because these connections do tend to be fragile, as the connection on the back of the caliper is brass, and if you it's pretty easy to over tighten. Next portion of the install involves the electrical phase. With that, we're going to utilize the Performance Trailer Break-In Revised diagram. This can be found on the website. It shows you where each wire hooks up to and how it should be hooked up. It's basically 5 wires: white, black, brown, blue, and purple. Your purple is going to be your hot wire. It's going to go straight to the battery. Your black wire is also going to be a hot wire. This is going to connect directly to the truck, utilizing the truck's battery. The white's going to be a ground to the ground battery of your RV. The blue now becomes your brake line, and the brown is going to run to your breakaway switch. First thing you want to do is just check over your pump, make sure that's in good looking condition. As this one, you'll notice it's got 2 ports, filler ports. These screw off. They connect to the same reservoir. Inside there's a rubber grommet of each. Just inspect to make sure that that's all good to go. Once you got that part, the next step is you're going to want to turn over your pump. Using a 4mm wrench, you're going to make sure that these 2 bolts, 2 nuts on the bottom of this are tight. In this case, I got a little bit of a turn out of them, but they've got a copper O-ring, compression ring that seals the bottom, preventing the brake fluid from leaving. Inside the kit, you'll also be included with yellow butt connectors and blue butt connectors. These are heat shrinkable so that you can prevent any moisture from entering your electrical system. Additional, you're going to have ring connectors that connect to the positive and negative terminals of your battery. You're going to take a look at your electrical wiring. You're going to see that it's cut to different lengths in a stair-step pattern. The reason why that is so that when you're connecting the next wires, the butt connectors are not all piled on top of each other, making a big, large blob, essentially. First thing I like to do is go through and then make my own ends. Then utilizing our butt connectors, I'm going to place butt connector on each end of the wiring, utilizing crimpers. It's important that once you crimp it on, you ensure that your connection is nice and strong by pulling on each end, and I'm pulling with pretty good pressure to make sure that our connection is tight. You're going to want to do that to each side.
When you're getting the pump out, getting ready to install, every one of these pumps is actually bench tested before it leaves the manufacturing plant. And what happens is the oil from that process ends up getting on around the actuator. It might be in a bag, even out on the box a little bit. But just be aware that because of these tabs are actually not connected anymore, it does not void the warranty. I've worked with Dexter and verified this directly, that it's there mainly to tell you not to go inside the white cap because it is not a serviceable item. If you were to go inside, they will be able to see where you've actually used a screwdriver on the screws, and then that would actually void out your warranty. So just be aware, just because the tabs are not connected, the pump is still good. Dexter will still honor the warranty.
Once you have your connections all tight on both ends, crimped with the butt connectors, just give them a nice little pull. Make sure that they're nice and tight, as you realize and you understand that an RV going down the road has a lot of vibrations, and the last thing you want to do is lose electrical connection to your pump. What we're going to do now is we're going to heat shrink these to make sure that we have a watertight connection. I'm showing you the purple wire as of note. All your wires are going to be pre-cut from us in your do-it-yourself kit. Your purple wire is going to be shorter than the rest, and that's due to the length that the gauge of that wire can handle from the battery. So that is why your purple wire is going to be shorter than the rest. Utilizing some sort of heated method, I'm going to use a torch. You can use a heat gun, you can use a lighter, whatever you feel is necessary for your purpose. Making sure that we heat the shrink wrap all the way around, and then we got a nice, tight, secure seal. Once you have all your butt connectors heat shrinked, just again go through and double check that you've still got good tight connections. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to want to make our wiring all nice and tidy so that it's easy to run through the trailer. Taking a nice grade of electrical tape, we're just going to bundle these up throughout You can do this for about 2.5 feet or so, because typically that's all you're going to need until you split the 5 wires to go to the different locations. It is important to note that if you do have an older style Chevy or Ford truck that requires a Ford Chevy adapter, that you would install the Ford Chevy adapter in between these butt connectors. You wouldn't actually use butt connectors in that case. You'd want to use a wire nut to install those, but the best place to do that is at this location, and you would do that before installing the pump. But in this case, we don't need to do that. Our truck isn't quite so old. Once we have that wire all wrapped up into a nice tight configuration, an optional step is to use wire loom to cover the wiring. In fact, we recommend it. It's not included with your kit. You can find this at various locations for a fairly cheap cost. One trick I like to do is take this nut right here that runs the electrical wires into the pump. Just disconnect that for right now. Unscrew it. Running a 1/2 inch loom for your wiring. Like I said, about a 2.5 to 3 foot span is good, because that's about as far as you'll need, maybe even less, depending on your situation, where your pump's located. In this case, our pump's going to be in the propane compartment, so we don't need a lot of wire loom before we split it. I'm going to run enough just to go past these butt connectors. Good thing to do is to take this nut right here, utilizing more electrical tape. I'm actually going to tape my wire loom to that nut, so that spot where there's a lot of stress, because you're going to typically bend these wires to go through the panel in your RV, is now secured. A lot of times I'll see that wire is not covered inside that loom, so I use a good amount of electrical tape here just to make sure that that nut is securely fastened to our wire loom. Once I do that, tighten that nut right back up to the pump. Then, as I mentioned, typically this is the spot where you're going to have some bend in your wiring to get it to the battery and then ultimately to your junction box. You're just going to want to take a few pieces of high quality electrical tape and secure the wire loom to the wiring so that it doesn't stick out, so that it's doing its job and it's more protected that way. Alright, we're back at the trailer now. The next step is going to be to install our actuator or pump. With this situation, you have a lot of choices. You can ultimately install the pump wherever you'd like. Performance Trailer Braking recommends that you install the pump in one of the propane compartments. Several reasons for this. The propane compartment allows you to put it in a location and utilize space in your trailer that you might not have thought about before. If you can see in this situation back here, there's space back here away from the propane tank that we can put the pump. So in this case, we're going to put it in the propane tank, but you can put it in a storage bay. You could put it anywhere that it'll fit. It's totally up to you. In this situation, like I said, we're going to put it in the propane bay because it's out of the way, it's protected from the elements, and it doesn't take up any of our valued storage space within the RV. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our mounting bracket. Your mounting bracket is going to come plain steel. We recommend that you coat that with a quick coat of paint so that it doesn't rust on your behalf. It's not necessary, but it's an option. When mounting your pump, you want to ensure that you mount the pump as level to the ground as possible. And there's several ways to mount it as far as location, like I said. Back here, we're going to mount it utilizing our level and some sort of marking device. I use a white paint marker. We're going to locate a location that we can put the pump or actuator flush. On this situation, it's going to be towards the front of the vehicle. Sometimes it's on the inside towards your front storage bay. Once you put this in, making sure that it's as level as possible, side to side, I'm going to make a mark, and then I'm going to go and just make sure that we're level as much as we can front to side. Now in this situation, we do have the front of the trailer jacked up a little bit. Just take that into consideration. Once I get this level, I'm going to mark my holes for my screws, if at all possible, you want to use as many holes within this bracket as possible to mount it when you use your self-tapping screws. If possible, use 4. In this situation, we're going to use 3. I would never use less than 3, as the pump is one of the most valuable pieces of your install. Once I have these marked, I'm going to go ahead and use a drill with a drill bit. I use a cobalt drill bit just because some of these frames are pretty hard. I'm going to pre-drill these holes. One tip, using a punch. This is an automatic punch, but you can use any kind of punch. You're going to just want to make sure that so that you don't lose exactly in your holes. Once you have your holes pre-drilled, you're then going to want to take your self-tapping screws and install the back portion of the bracket. Checking to make sure that when you install it, you got it nice and level. It's important to note that whenever you're placing in self-tapping screws anywhere on your frame, on your RV, that you thoroughly check behind. You don't want to hit anything such as a hydraulic line, water line, or holding tanks. Otherwise, you may be invested in your brake kit more than you'd want to be. So once we have this in here, it's installed, it's nice and level. Our next thing to do is to take our pump. We're going to take our pump and we're just going to place it on here. And we're going to simply take our propane tank and we're just going to make sure that it's free of obstructions. In this case, there's quite a bit of room in here, but some of the propane bays are a little more tight. So you want to make sure that the propane tank can sit nice and square where it's supposed to without interruption from the pump. So once we've done that, our next step then is to install the pump to the bracket. We like to take the screws that are provided with the kit, utilizing our blue oil resistant Loctite, and they're going to go right up through the bottom holes in the bracket and install into our pump. The next step is going to be to take your straight rubber hose. That's the one without the 90-degree connection. That's going to screw in right to the front of your actuator. Utilizing your 1/2 inch and 5/8 inch wrench, you're going to tighten on that straight rubber hose. Again, considering that this is a brass fitting, you don't want to over tighten. Utilizing your first bracket, as you notice, there's these little edges that are flipped up. In some situations, you may need to flatten those out. This is one of those cases. I'm going to utilize this, utilizing my screw. I'm going to go through the bottom portion. Just align it the best way that you can for your system. And I'm going to run this right up the bottom. On the other side, you're going to take your clip. It may be gold, it may be silver. I'm going to take my hose, I'm going to run it around. And it's going to go in whatever configuration is great for your rig. Sometimes it may be straight like this. Sometimes it may be curved this way. In this situation, we're going to go straight to the back because we're going to run our line down the back side. Take that clip on the back side, I'll show you. It's going to go inside here, and this clip is going to insert onto here, securing your hose to that clip. Once that clip's in place, you're good to move on to the next step. At this juncture, you're going to take your wired actuator pump and you're going to run it preferably through a hole that's already in place. A lot of times you'll see either a propane line hole or a spot that's already drilled out, and you're going to utilize that to put your wires into your front storage compartment. Once you have your wires run through the wall wherever you put your actuator or pump, you're going to utilize the PTB revised wiring diagram and ensure that you connect those connections to that. So in this case, we have our purple and our white lines. You're going to connect the purple to the red or the hot side, the positive side of your battery. You're going to then use the white side, you're going to connect it to the negative side of the battery. In this case, we have a battery box. Sometimes it may be a direct connection to your battery. It's all the same. The other three wires, your black, your blue, and your brown, are going to be run typically above. You're going to pull the wires through your underbelly or frame here. Once they're connected here, you're going to utilize those wires. You're going to connect them to a black bundle. You're going to connect the blue wire from the truck, which comes off of your 7-pin adapter. And your brown wire is going to be connected to the other end of your breakaway switch that is not connected to the black side. Once you do that, your pump should be functional.
The next step is to actually start to run your brake lines. And the easiest way to actually curl this out and make it nice and straight is to use two people on a solid surface. You can use the grass, but the grass is not necessarily a flat surface, so it's not going to be quite as straight, but you can do it that way. So the first thing you want to do is curl it out about as much to where you want to start straightening it. Zach, if you'll go ahead and step on it right there. And then you just curl it out. Now you got a fairly straight line, and when you start to put it in place and actually attach it, it'll be nice and straight for you. There's several ways to run the brake line. You can run it here, or you can run it up high. You could actually run it underneath if you wanted to. What we've elected to do is run it up high. So we're going to start feeding the brake line in, because there's a couple of gussets here in the way. And feed it. Once you've got your main brake line basically in the area where you want it to be mounted, you want to actually start hooking up one end of it to the actuator. Don't tighten it up, just basically hand tighten it. And then what you'll do is you'll start using a series of clamps to actually support the pipe, the brake line itself, to the frame. This is the metal clamp with a rubber bushing on it, and then also the nylon, which pretty self-explanatory. Just put screws in. They're all self-tappers. You want to mount, basically every fitting where there's a connector, you want a hard clamp, and then in between 18 inches and 24 inches, you want to support it with one of the nylon clamps. And that's what I'm going to do through here now. I'm just going to go through and start mounting that main line to the trailer. Basically what I'm doing right now is just putting clamps in to support the brake line every 18 inches to 24 inches. So I've drilled a hole, got the clamp up there. Okay, now we're finishing the main line that you got right here, came to here. We ran to a first tee. From the first tee, we actually branched off to do the right side of the trailer, the door side. And then we continued on here. We still got to get a clamp or two in here, but this branch here will feed the two tires, calipers on this side. So as you can see, once again, clamping and securing the line every 18 inches to 24 inches should take care of that. So we'll continue on, and then we'll show you how to finish a caliper on this hose here. So this brake line here is where that line ends up over here. That's feeding the off door side wheels. We mounted our bracket after we've unnotched that little tab because we didn't need it here. Connected our rubber hose basically to our brake line. So we still got a little bit of a clamp to do in here, but as you can see, it is terminated right here. The biggest thing that you need to know about in this area is when you run this brake line, right, the rubber hose, this rubber hose cannot rub on the tires or the wheels or any other suspension part to actually would rub a hole in that line. So you just want to make sure that this rubber line is not rubbing in contact with any item after it's all put together. And that will complete the installation. You'll also want to bleed the brake lines and then test your brakes after you put your tires and wheels back on. Also, if you have any questions or need some assistance, don't hesitate to give PTB a call at 405-626-7009.